it's a hierarchy, okay? It's not Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but the idea that the very bottom of this thing is sleep. And right above that is food. And right above that is training. So training goes away before food goes away before sleep. So you think about your sleep as the fundamental. If you're starting to feel moody and problematic here, sacrifice a day of training, continue to eat well, and get good sleep.
This is Early Miles, and I'm Steve Gonzer. On this show, we talk to runners, coaches, clinicians, and thinkers about the moments that shaped how they train, how they think, and how they ended up where they are. Early Miles is ad-free and supported by runners who are members of the RunSmart app. RunSmart is a training platform built by physical therapists. If you have an upcoming race or are looking to train and run smart, you can download the RunSmart app from the App Store or Google Play. And now, today's episode. Dr. Jeffrey Durmer is a neurologist, neuroscientist, and one of the pioneers in modern sleep medicine. He has over 20 years of experience helping Olympians, pro teams, and everyday athletes improve performance through better recovery. He also brings firsthand experience as a former elite rower, which makes his perspective both scientific and really practical. In this conversation, we break down what under-recovery really looks like, how to make sense of things like HRV and sleep tracking, and why your circadian rhythm, nervous system, and even food timing matter more than you would think. We get into chronotypes, light exposure, alcohol, and what actually works when it comes to building a better sleep routine. Whether you're trying to hit a PR or just want to feel better on your runs, this episode will help you connect the dots between sleep and performance, and you don't even need a medical degree to follow along. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Durmer.
Funny thing is, I went to college initially to play football and baseball, but then ended up becoming a rower, and went from a 235 pound, 6'3" athlete to a 190 pound rower. So it was a very different period of time for me. And I entered college really with the understanding that I was interested in performance, and also in a sense, like before there was really something called neuroscience, I was really interested in sort of the mind-body connection in terms of consciousness and psychology and biology. So I forged my own major in college, which was psychobiology, and it was a double major in those two. And that really was sort of, the beginnings of what we call neuroscience, was psychobiology at the time. Yeah, spent a lot of time studying how animals develop sensory systems around different functions in the environment, but then also understanding how people and animals in general internalize those experiences as conscious or not conscious. That's really where things started for me. And sleep sort of kind of crept in during my PhD studies. That's where I learned about some of the brain stem anatomy associated with consciousness that also is overlapped greatly with sleep and circadian rhythms.
Yeah. So where did you go to med school at Trinity?
No. I went to University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia for my MD and my PhD.
So back when you were in med school, was there a lot of education around sleep, or were you kind of like forging that path? Was it, minimal? Right. What did that look like?
It was early days for sure. I mean, sleep medicine itself as a clinical practice has only been around since the 70s. So it was forged by a group of scientists actually from the University of Chicago, where a lot of this preliminary and preeminent research was done. And that group actually ended up moving to Stanford and starting the first clinical program. And when I was at Penn, and this was in the 90s, it was basically sort of a novel thing to be an MD PhD back then. There was not a lot of us. There were probably like 5 of us. And now there's like probably 50 every year. It's a much bigger program. I was more interested in understanding these brainstem anatomy and neurosystems that are underlying things like consciousness and perception. And sleep itself was something that we had at least a century of really great research in sleep and circadian rhythm that never got to awareness within the clinical field. So, as an MD going into my PhD period, I didn't really know much about sleep. And it was really through the work in my cat models, looking at what was basically blind sight models called the Sprague effect, where I discovered a nucleus in the brainstem that I was studying for visual processing, subcortical visual processing, that's also associated with REM sleep. And that nucleus called the pedunculopontine nucleus, or PPN,
Spell
is
it. No,
yeah,
just kidding.
I can.
Yeah, I bet you can.
Yeah, and that and a bunch of other nuclei you don't want to hear about.
Yeah.
But that pedunculopontine nucleus, or PPN, actually is really well known within the sleep world, because it's where what we call REM on and off cells live. So when an acetylcholinergic neuron in the REM on period activates, it helps to activate REM sleep, which is an actual biological process of the brain. So these are active processes. Sleep is a very active process. A lot of things
Yeah.
happening that we don't recognize, typically because we're not aware of it. But also biologically, physicians are very unaware of what happens at night in sleep, because it's much more relegated into the research realm and far more into the neuroscience realm, which is where I was exposed to this. And then when I went back to clinical work, um, kind of had to decide, what was I going to do here? Continue into sort of the neuro-ophthalmology. I was a neurologist by background, that's where I was headed. So stay in that sort of neuro-ophthalmology realm, a visual processing realm, even looking at stroke as another potential realm to overlap with this, or get into sleep. And then sleep medicine at Penn was very much run by the pulmonology department. At that point, there were no neurologists in sleep. So I was the first neurology resident to become a sleep fellow at Penn. And then after me, there were a few more that are pretty well known also in the field now. These guys have been doing this for a number of years, but it comes out of the research realm,
Yeah. Do
not
you
not
feel
so much
like
clinical.
where we're currently at, obviously, like you have sleep labs and stuff now, there's a lot
Hmm.
more involved in there. Do you feel like there's been a lot of strides? Or do you feel like, from the clinical side, it seems to be
Hmm.
to be lagging behind? It seems like almost the performance side, the consumer side is like
Yeah,
skyrocketed. And where do you
yeah,
feel like that has been on pace with like the clinical side, or do you feel like that's outpacing on the consumer side?
yeah. So there were no consumer electronic devices pacing sleep back in the day when I was doing this. So this is relatively new in a sense. But the actual data that's being collected around sleep in the consumer electronic world is it has a lot of utility, in the sense that it shows us a lot about our behaviors around sleep. Um, Now, the main device, if you will, or the main technology in sleep medicine and in clinical practice, is the polysomnogram, which is the laboratory test for sleep. And we've got 50 years or more of data around polysomnography. So there's a lot of rich history and data around that. But it's very hard to get that data. You have to put people in weird situations. You got to put a lot of electrodes on them. And it kind of is, the Hawthorne effect of changing the measurement of what you're trying to measure just by implementing it and instrumenting it. So I think that's probably one of the problems with that approach. So
Is
over
it
the
just
course
the
of
approach
years,
of like, hey, have a good night's sleep with all this
yeah,
stuff attached to you? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So as soon as you start to measure something, you impact it. That's the
Yeah.
whole
White
point of
coat
the Hawthorne.
syndrome. Yeah.
Exactly. So that the whole point of the polysomnographic testing was that it's very detailed, it's very clinical, eliminating a number of variables so that we can just look at your biology. But at the same time, it is artificial. And so it is creating some artificial. We have things like called the first night effect that are well documented in the literature, which is putting somebody in a lab for the first night. You don't get a lot of deep
Bad data.
non-REM sleep. You don't
Yeah.
get a lot of REM sleep. You get a lot of changes that are typical. So, yeah, for years we had the polysomnographic testing that was really helpful, but nonetheless was somewhat error prone, in the sense it didn't give us a lot of longitudinal information. It was one single night. And then along came consumer electronics and wearables, and these were mainly accelerometers. So the very first ones were like the Fitbit on your belt, and it would just move with you, and movement is what we could tell. So it became very clear that when there's lack of movement, that might be sleep. And that was sort of the first consumer electronics. Still to this day, that's most electronics
Mhm.
are using accelerometry as their predictor. But then you add in things like PPG sensors, which are photoplasmography sensors looking at your pulse from your finger or from your wrist. And those are light-based sensors that basically permeate into the tissue, and they can look at pulsatile changes within blood flow. This is also what a pulse ox does, basically uses PPG for this. So that's an old technology that was applied to these consumer electronics. And all of a sudden, now you've got more data, and you can see the change across state change when you look at PPG. So PPG has changes in state, movement, accelerometry changes in state. So these devices started to become more predictive of sleep. They're not measuring sleep, they're predicting sleep in a sense. Wind forward, we've got now, after Jaw blown up and a couple of others were out there in the field, all of a sudden Apple gets into the game. And then we have Whoop and Aura and all these other devices that started to get into the market. They have things like temperature sensing, which also can be associated with predicting sleep, as well as a number of other, oxygen sensing components as well. So now we're getting closer to what, some of the measures we use in polysomnography, yet it's not polysomnography. So when we start talking about like sleep stages, and this is typically where the problem occurs, like, hey, you're in REM sleep, or you're in deep non-REM sleep, or light non-REM sleep, which is sort of how consumer electronic devices look at it versus stage 1, 2, and 3. Those are not so easy to determine, and those have less accuracy and honestly less utility, because one of the things that we really care about is night to night changes, like the longitudinal effects of just having a bad night versus a good night, sleep disordered breathing having more of an impact one night versus another, recovery sleep versus sleep during stressful times. These are all going to have very different signatures. And it's not really polysomnographic data sets that help us understand that, because now we're trying to apply PSG or polysomnographic measurements to a consumer electronic device that's not really well equipped to do that, and then do it across multiple measurements across time. So the inaccuracies actually become compounded over time, not get better. So, I think once we get to the consumer electronic, like wearable world, the big change has not just been the sensors, but the algorithms. And so algorithm development has become really the mainstay for developing much more accurate longitudinal measures of sleep and monitors of sleep, which is in a sense what we do now at the company where I work now. It's Happy Health is the company, and our ring is this device right here. This has photoplasmography sensors, 4 of them. It has temperature sensors for skin and ambient temperature, accelerometers, all the same things you typically see, and oxygen sensing. But it is the algorithms that have been developed with that data and how it's combined and then utilized in a clinical way, that this is now an FDA cleared medical device. So you can do a home sleep test, just like a polysonogram from home, though, with a ring. That's,
So do you feel like
25 years.
the tech itself has been used forever? Like everyone's got similar tech. It's who can dial in that algorithm the best and who can apply
Yeah.
it the best.
And also who can get the data right. That's the other part too, because one of the things about some of the other consumer electronic devices is you're optimizing for like battery life. You're trying to use it, for like a week without having to charge it. And that means you make measurements every couple of minutes, or you make a measurement every 5 minutes.
Okay.
A device like this is making 100 measurements a second. So 100 hertz second. And that means you're getting an incredible density of data sets coming from the physiology that can then be used to predict
Yeah.
not just sleep, but a whole host of things like blood pressure management. You can look at oxygenation. You can look at AFib. There's so many things you can do with more data and a good algorithm.
Yeah, I'm thinking of
regard.
like my Whoop, which charges on my wrist, and I've been using Whoop, I'm like an OG Whoop user. But when you talk about those things and how frequently you're checking, are you sacrificing a lot of battery life with that, or like how does that work? Because like I know Aura Ring, my wife has one. She was so hesitant to get it at first because she was going to have that first night syndrome every night. She's more stressed about what it's going to say when she's laying back to go to sleep that she would just get bad readings. But how do you guys handle like battery life on something like that when you are checking more frequently?
Yeah, so the way we really look at it is this. I mean, if you're using a device to check your sleep, you don't really need to wear it during the day. So this is a device for sleep. You take it off and I'm wearing it because I'm showing you what it looks like. But basically, you can use it in the daytime. You can get your metrics in the daytime. But really, the utility of a sleep-based wearable, FDA cleared or not, is that it actually has enough data from the night itself.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
in terms of battery life, this can go for 2 to 3 days. But if you're going to put it into the clinical FDA mode, because we can switch it from a consumer electronic into an FDA mode on the back end. That's what we do in our programs. We're going to basically collect that data overnight, and then you're going to be at a ring that's about half charged to about 2/3 charged when you wake up. So you
Yeah,
pop it in the ring thing, and it basically charges by the time you get out of the shower.
the how do you feel that works? I'm thinking of that makes so much sense on like, hey, if you want to track sleep, like you need more frequent updates. Does it matter with like tracking for an athlete, like what happens during the day though? Like what kind of strain do they have? What kind of activities do they do? Because I feel like maybe that's a component of it where, Whoop is worn all the time. It brings things in. And how do you think about, okay, this is just for sleep, but having a component of strain throughout the day, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of those metrics, to be perfectly honest, are not very accurate.
Hmm.
So I think that recovery metrics are not well personalized right now. I have a lot of friends who do HRV biofeedback based research, and even those kinds of measures are not even used properly. I mean, the idea of HRV is not it's not a fixed number. It's not like something that you're not shooting for a value. You're actually looking to see if you can manipulate your HRV.
Hmm.
That's more important. So, like genetically, you may be predisposed to having an HRV of 25,
Yeah.
and somebody
It's like
else may be
VO2 max
100.
kind of like you get what you
Right?
get.
It's what you got, but it doesn't mean that you can't manipulate your nervous system. Because
Hmm.
unlike a VO2, which actually predicts how much oxygen you can move through your body, this is actually how you can manipulate your nervous system and turn it on and turn it off and activate parasympathetic and sympathetic tone. That's far more predictive of performance in athletes as well. Like if you're walking up to if you're a golfer, I have a good friend, Jay Wiles, who does a lot of work with golfers, and he teaches the psychologists. He teaches them HRV biofeedback. So as they're walking up to the green to sink a putt at the Masters, they can control their heart rate. They can
Hmm.
control their breathing. They can actually have their focus. Do the same thing with I work with Olympic weightlifters and swimmers, and getting them before the event to be able to put themselves not just into a hyper state of sympathetic tone, but actually to control it so that they can focus and actually bring themselves in the moment. That's what really is necessary. It's not the ability to hype up; it's the ability to focus.
Sure. I'd
Um,
love to
yeah,
talk about HRV a little bit
sure.
from what I understand, it's parasympathetic versus sympathetic, which is rest and digest versus flight or fight.
Hmm.
You can
Basically,
completely blow that out,
no,
but
that basically,
so it's
yeah.
that balance. And can you just kind of walk us through? Because I think that's like, from what I understand and what I see, like I know Whoop is hard on HRV, and that's kind of like their big sensor throughout the day. They talk about that all throughout their home screen. I'm not sure about Aura and things, but can you kind of help us understand that term, what it means actually, and how it relates to sleep?
Yeah. So the heart rate variability is exactly what it says. It's the variability between the heartbeats. So it's the rate at which things change. And when you are under stress or your sympathetic nervous system is active, it increases your heart rate, just like it increases your blood pressure, it increases your respiratory rate, and it makes it very regular. It's like a very regular beat, a metronome. And that regularity means your variability is low. So think of it in that sense. Now, when you are not stressed and parasympathetic tone is allowed to come up, what ends up happening is you end up with your heart itself goes into a slight arrhythmic pattern, which means it's variable. It slows down when you breathe in, it speeds up. When you breathe out, it slows down. So you're getting a respiratory variability with your heart rate. And so the relationship between your heart and your breathing is predicted by your heart rate variability. So the more variable your heart rate and your breathing are related, your HRV goes up. And HRV being up means that your heart and your lungs are responding to each other. When they're not up, it means your respiratory system and your heart are acting separately. And in medical studies, people with low heart rate variability who have cardiac histories tend to have more problems. That's actually a predictor of like a potential cardiovascular event. So not having regularity in your heart, or not having variability in your heart rate and your respiratory system, the reaction between the two, bad outcomes for people with heart issues. And just that, so that knowledge, I think, was taken out of context and
Mhm.
applied to general people who don't have heart issues. And that's one of the problems with this, that it's having a low HRV is now thought of as disease. High HRV, health. That's not the story. The story is if you're healthy, you're healthy. And if your HRV is low, it's just that's where your HRV is. Now, yeah, if you trained, if you're untrained, certainly your heart rate variability will go up as you train. That's something you'll see because your cardiac and respiratory systems will start to react to each other better. They'll become more trained to each other. But if you are trained and your heart rate variability is, say, 45 and somebody else's is 80, it doesn't mean that they're better off than you. It doesn't mean even that you have more risk for heart disease. Um, it's just where you are. It's just what your HRV is. And
So for
as you
example,
said,
of if you have
yeah,
like longitudinally, like say someone's tracking that, would you say it's accurate? Like the depending on the device and without having to make a blanket statement, do you feel like they do a decent job tracking HRV, or do you feel like it's all over the board? Certainly, it matters if you have like
yeah,
tattoos and things on your wrist. I heard that
yeah.
can play with it, but how good are these wearables today?
So I am not the HRV specialist like my buddy Jay is, but I know from working with Jay for a number of years, he doesn't rely on any of them.
Okay.
He thinks that they're all pretty inaccurate. And part of the reasoning behind the inaccuracy is the quality of the data being collected. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're not collecting data across the pulse, you're not getting accuracy. So if you're only doing it every few minutes, you're just taking snapshots. There's a huge inaccuracy with that. Even if you were going to compare like to like, it's still, the average is what you're looking at now, not highs and lows. And another part of HRV analysis, if you get into the science of HRV, which is not just straightforward looking at the variability, there are time signature differences, there are amplitude differences, there are variables within the HRV that are more important and actually are relate to not just health, but also your ability to reflexively change in times of stress, for instance, like the example of walking up to sink a putt at the Masters. Those are things that are not represented by a general HRV. That giving you a number doesn't give you any of those details. It's sort of like, it's a very generalized average kind of number. Think of it this way. When we make measurements over the course of a minute, and we make 3 measurements or 4 measurements, say every 15 seconds, you make a measurement
Mm-hmm.
of the heart rate. And each one of those measurements tells you, okay, the heart rate here is 60 beats a minute. Okay, here it's 62. Oh, here it's 59. And here it's 60 again. So the average is like 60 across all those 4 measurements. But if you were to make measurements every second, you found that it was 60 and it went up to 80 and then it went down to 40 and then it went up to 60. You're getting this variability, but all you're seeing is the average. So the averages could look the same in those two examples, but the vast
Variability is way
differences,
different.
the variability is so much different. So that's why Jay and others don't rely on the devices that don't have that kind of accuracy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You with going into that sleep, and you talked about strategies for, it almost sounds like you're priming the pump for parasympathetic, trying to shut off, the flight or flight mode from like an athlete standpoint. And say, do you ever feel like, is it right to say that someone may just have a poor HRV, or they might have just an over dominant flight or fight response because of hard training, wearing down, training stresses that could just make you have either you're overtraining, so you haven't your body cannot sleep well and cannot recover because you're overtraining, or it's a natural response to a hard workout and then you need to recover and you can see your body not shutting off? Or how can we think about that in the frame of like endurance training, marathoning, ultra marathoning, 5Ks,
Hmm.
things like that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question actually, because the idea of overtraining is overactivity of the sympathetic nervous system. It is stress, and it's not good stress in the sense that it's not creating, it's not building. It's actually tearing down, and that's actually really important. It's not HRV that's going to predict that so much. It's actually going to be much more related to um, the way your mentality changes. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And when people are overtraining, they often continue to overtrain because they're focused on a goal
Mm-hmm.
versus the general picture of where they are in their training schedule or their training cycle. So the idea of getting focused or hyper focused on the moment versus the bigger picture and being able to kind of roll with your training schedule and be okay with failure, which is key, is what makes you a better athlete. It, Using heart rate variability as a component of that, I suppose, could be useful if you're using it in a way um, that is more of a biofeedback manner. In other words, there are ways to use high frequency measurements of HRV as feedback to you so that you can start to work with your breathing, for instance, to help modulate your heart. And those two start to become more um, understood by you. Like you can start to feel what it feels like to control your heart and feel what it feels like to use your breath to actually do that. That actually helps. That's actually predictive of reducing your chances of overtraining and having a stress induced injury, for instance, because of overtraining. And I mean, to the ultra marathoners out there, you got to say what you're doing is putting yourself in a position of continuous stress. There's a certain limit to our human abilities, so you got to take that into consideration
I don't
when you're
think we're
doing
gonna
these things.
I don't think we're gonna talk anyone out of running ultras. That's probably doing it at this point, but
No, no, no. I'm not here to talk them out of it, but I just want to understand that there's really not much you can do when you go beyond the normal limits of day and wait, night and sleep. Sleep itself is being, kind of ignored in those cases. So it's more of a trial by living through it than anything else.
it makes me think of some of these overnight ultras or the multi-day ones where they're getting 5 minutes of sleep and things. When you see those things happening, like the effect, is there any kind of understanding of the long-term effect or even like the short term of in the case of months, or how does it take to recover from like prolonged non episodes of not sleeping, things like that? Certainly it's got to just drive a lot of like uh, under recovery type of things happening inside the body. But is there any kind of research out there or anyone looking at like what happens with sleep deprivation?
Oh, we have decades of research on sleep deprivation. Actually, that's why it's
I think it's
also
used for like
considered.
torture in the military, isn't it too?
I was going to say this is actually considered torture.
Yeah.
National law forbids it because of that. If you want to put yourself through it, that's up to you. But I think the point here is that we know so much about the physiologic and mental effects and emotional effects of sleep deprivation, and then put on top of it a stressor like running or you know having to finish a race in that period of time. I think the point is that you have to understand that even though it is chosen uh, by the individual, there are things that you're going to end up having to deal with, like potentially cardiac arrhythmias. We also, have difficulty modulating our nervous system after a certain period of time. You just think about being sleep deprived without having to run.
Mm-hmm.
Being sleep deprived, I mean, as a physician, having been on call in the past and in hospitals and sleeping 3 hours over 48 hours, you don't have control of how hot you get or how cold you are. Your thermal regulatory abilities fall apart. Same thing with your blood pressure, same thing with your glucose level. So a lot of these things are no longer modulated by your own physiologic systems because they are not functioning properly. And then you add on top of that exercise, which is sort of like, that's why I say this is more of a survival thing than it is actually, in a sense, a sport to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done ultras. I've done 50 milers. I've paced a woman who did 100 through a Buffalo winter once, and this is pretty well known. But we were running. She's like, "Do you see that?" I'm like, "See what?" She's like, "See all those frogs over there?" I'm like, "I don't." She's like, "I didn't think so." She's done many of these. She's like, "I'm hallucinating again," and then she just kept running.
Well, there you go. That's just an example of one of your sensory systems telling you it's offline. These are. Look at it this way. These are clearly physiologic symptoms coming from your body and your brain telling you things. And we often ignore them. We ignore sleep, by the way. That's a very cultural thing to begin with. We ignore our sleep. We drink coffee. We take amphetamines. We use B12. We use a whole bunch of things to stay awake during the day and improve our performance. But what we're really getting at is a lack of sleep, and sleep deprivation actually leads to not just these temporary performance issues, but it leads to long-term health issues. I mean, if you look at the sort of behavior of humans over the last 50 to 60 years, we went from an average sleep time in the United States for adults during the week of 8 hours to 6 hours, just from the late 60s, early 70s to now. And nothing has changed in our biology in that short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But what has changed is our culture. So in the 60s and 70s, we didn't have 24/7. We had 7-Elevens. That was it. That was the big deal, to be up at 7 and close at 11. Now they're 24/7 gas stations, 24/7 food, everything's 24/7. So we've lost the cultural the cultural prompt that sleep is important. I remember my grandmother actually talking about like 7-Eleven when I was a kid, saying, well, who's going to go to that store? That's ridiculous. Nobody's going to be up at 7 o'clock. Who's going to be out at 11 o'clock at night? Everybody's in bed at 8:30. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not how it happens anymore, Grandma.
Yeah.
But that's culturally where things are now. And if you look at the, longitudinal curves for, like, the CDC has studied this for many years. And the significant increase in things like obesity and diabetes and hypertension across the country are completely relatable. If you look at that change from 8 hours down to 6 hours, at the same time, you see obesity rates jumping up, and the curves just basically intersect in the 1980s. So in the 80s, when all the things became 24/7, you started seeing diabetes and obesity taking off. Now it's starting to come back down because of GLP-1s, but that's not because of sleep.
Yeah.
So we really do have an issue here where, a number of your systems in your body, like if you look at the hormonal system associated with satiety, the ghrelin and leptin systems. The ghrelin system is something that your stomach makes. So basically, it activates your appetitive hormones in your brain that actually make you eat. And then leptin is made by fat cells. It helps to reduce ingestion. And when you get to sleep deprivation, even within a couple of days of sleep deprivation, leptin and ghrelin levels change directly. You all of a sudden see that ghrelin outnumbers leptin, even though you may have eaten. And so all of a sudden people are eating more in the middle of the night when they honestly should just be sleeping, but they're eating. And they, this is where they're craving carbs. This is also where we see the freshman 10 pounds added on in college because kids are up late and for the first time away from home, drinking beer, having pizza at 11:30 at night and 12 o'clock at night. There's a lot of reality to what sleep deprivation actually promotes in the body related to increasing, changing your metabolism.
Yeah, regardless of like the stance of the wearable side, coming from the more athletic side, I feel like there's way more chatter on proper sleep, proper rest than I remember from even 10 years ago, where a lot of athletes are focused on it. What maybe the general population in the United States is not well anyways, but do you feel like there is movement in the right direction there? Or do you feel like there's just so much to do and maybe separating out general public and athletics performance? I feel like the performance side is going in the right direction. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes. Yes, I think that absolutely. I've worked with Olympic athletes. I've worked with NCAA teams and professional football teams and others. It's really clear that they take it seriously because it is about performance, and it's also about with the NFL at least. I worked with the Atlanta Falcons for a while. The NFL to the football players stands for not for long, so they know
Yeah.
that their life in this world is not long in that league. So part of it is, how do I outlast this? How do I, sort of like your survival running at 100 miles, the same thing here. They're trying to survive. So sleep is the main way that they survive. In fact, I think people really, in the high performance athletes, look for any kind of edge that will provide them longevity, recovery, or enhanced performance. And one thing that sleep does is all three of those. It does recovery on a daily basis. It enhances your performance if you use it properly before a major event, and also if you are able to incorporate circadian principles into your training. Um, and it's also something that will help you live longer in your sport. I mean, look at the most storied athletes in many of the different sports. They were really good sleepers. That's true of a lot of good athletes.
Yeah, if you look, obviously the Olympics are going on right now. That's either a 6 or a 9 hour swing for those athletes heading over there.
That's right.
Coming from me, so I flew from Toronto to Berlin to run that marathon and just never felt right. We got there like 24, 36 hours before the race. Certainly not an Olympic athlete here, but from the Olympic side or just a general runner who's maybe going to cross country, going to Japan to run, like is I think I read that there's you kind of promote sleep stacking a little bit for performance or things leading up to a key event. Like how would you look at it? Those Olympians going over, you worked with Olympic athletes, or just a runner who's traveling long distance to do a race. Is there a general principle that is easy-ish to follow to try to make sure that you're still taking your performance with you?
Yes, absolutely. There's a general rule, which is every time zone is a day of adjustment. So if you think of it from that perspective, you go 7 time zones, it takes you 7 days for your biology to catch up on average. It's a rule of
It's going
thumb.
to get
It's not
expensive quick.
exactly. So, but it is also something you can prepare for. So, one of the things I did for the 2020 Olympics is put together a camp, a circadian camp for the weightlifters, the U.S. weightlifters in Honolulu, and we scheduled it in advance of the Tokyo Games, where people could only fly in 2 days ahead of time because of COVID. Um, so we flew all of our weightlifters to Hawaii, and they stayed in a hotel that we then put on the time signature of Japan, where they're going to be actually competing. And we slowly adjusted their time so that they would become in line with the time zone where they're going to compete. That meant that when they left the US, I'll tell you about what they did when they left, but when they got to Hawaii, they were on a 2 week schedule. That in those 2 weeks, I would slowly delay them further and further. So they were staying up later and later and later, getting up as late as almost noon before they left with blackout blinds. They weren't, they only went outside during their daytime. And then they were weightlifting up till almost midnight. And that was in line with their actual events in Tokyo. That made a huge difference because now when they got on a plane to fly there, all they had to do was maintain what their schedule was, and they got there and they were already prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
Getting light and creating that activation in country was the only other step they had to take. Before they came to the camp, the other thing we did is another practice, is not circadian modulation like I was just mentioning there. We do a slow, gradual over a couple of weeks shift, but they did sleep banking. And so sleep banking is spending an extra 15 minutes time in bed every week or every couple of days. So you can, depending on how much time you have to do this, but you can even do it in like a week before you go somewhere. Just increase the amount of sleep time, because as you increase sleep time and you increase the amount of sleep that you're getting, when you end up in a place where you're going to be sleep deprived, you have much better performance. And there are a number of studies that demonstrate that effect of adding sleep time. So we did that as well. So we not only adjusted their circadian rhythm, we also extended their sleep time just by some people almost an hour, some people 15 to 20 minutes, but that allowed them to go in country on schedule and more rested than not, so that even though they're sleep deprived because they could have insomnia the night before their event, that's not going to affect them that much. It won't.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, having a little insomnia doesn't affect most performances. There are some studies that demonstrate, like with single single event or single lift kinds of events where you're doing like a 1 rep max, which is weightlifting. It can affect things like grip strength. It can affect small components, but overall performance is predicated not on the grip strength, it's here. And the psychological performance and the preparation for, does this weight feel heavy or light, is much more predictive of their success than the physical nature of their sleep the night before. So getting yourself into the right state of mind, which is actually where coming up with the idea of sort of being able to focus and bring parasympathetic into the mix, not just being driven by sympathetic surges constantly, because the more you pull, the more activity you activate in the nervous system, it doesn't necessarily make you more efficient. And efficiency is actually the key here.
Yeah. So if you were going, say someone's going 6-hour time zone, they have a race they trained a year for, can you kind of highlight what does that look like leading up? They start doing 15-minute increments a week out, did you say, or is it more than that?
Yeah. So if you're going to travel 6 time zones, that's 6 hours. The way to look at it is when if you have the opportunity, the first thing is if you have the opportunity to go there for this example, a week or 2 weeks in advance, that's the best thing you can do. Because once you get there, you get on the time signature, you start eating on the time zone, you start, activating on that time zone. That's the best thing you can do, is just show up early and get on the time signature. If you can't do that and you have to stay where you are and then fly, the idea is to slowly change your sleep time so that you can adjust to what sleep and wake will be where you're going, and try to get to it as close as possible. You may not be able to get 6 hours off, but even 2 hours would be helpful. At the same time, add a little length to your sleep. So if you're typically like a 7-hour sleeper, try to get to 8 hours before you take off. That way you're increasing you're reducing the vulnerability that you have for sleep deprivation when you get there. So the combination of those two things can be really helpful. And then it could take you for 6 hours or 6 time zones. That should take at least a week. I would suggest adjusting, I think more than that, probably like 2 weeks, because adjusting your sleep is difficult, especially depending on which way you're going. If you're going to be traveling east, you've got to advance. That means go to sleep early, which is much harder than going to sleep later. That's why it's always better to try to delay. That's why I pulled everybody from the East Coast to California to Honolulu, then Honolulu to Japan, instead of going the other way around. But really, going to France, for instance, that was the last, weightlifters Olympics we managed. That was, 7 hours going the other way. And so they had to fly over to France. But the idea there was, let's just go to France like the month before. So we took everybody.
Tough.
Well, we put together a training camp. So put a training camp together in France and get them acclimated. Because the other thing too is, it's not just when you wake up and when you go to sleep. It's when you eat. It's when you work out. It's all of those components need to shift with you. And one of the things that actually is really good research at Harvard, a couple of folks up there I know that are doing work on food and what the timing of intake actually can be as effective as light therapy, is actually using food in a way that activates the gut, which has many neurons that activate the central nervous system through the parasympathetic nerve, through the vagal nerve. So, think about your food, think about your light exposure, and then think about your activity levels. And they should be basically associated with where you're headed, not where you are right now. Yeah. That's general principle.
So it seems like, not to dumb this down too much, circadian rhythm is like your sleep-wake cycles. Is that basically? Okay. Yeah. So it seems like that Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just that, but it sounds like that can inherently shift a little bit, or you can train that some, obviously. Are there hard ends on that? We talked about HRV, like you get what you get, and it's related to your baseline. And we know people are morning people, some people are night people. So does, does that have harder flexes on certain people? And then also, once you shift away from that and you come back, is what's the refractory period on getting back to normal? Do you do the same thing on the way back, or you just,
Yeah.
stay up a couple days and get back on schedule and it takes like a week, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, the first thing is there are definitely there's something called chronotypes. So your point there's a nature and nurture, right? So your basic nature is a specific chronotype. Some people are morning larks, some are late evening. Very few people are actually extreme on that. I'm talking like 4 or 5% of the population on extremes. More of the morning and the evening, very definitely morning and evening people. Vast majority of us, bell
Yeah,
curve,
bell
or in the
curve,
middle.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and being in that, what we call N types, that's actually a good thing because you can move back and forth more easily. Somebody who's a morning person or an evening person, it's much more difficult for them to actually make those switches. And it turns out that it's, depending on which way you're going, it can be really hard for like a night owl to go to France and have to wake up early. It's like almost impossible. So in some ways, we got to go backwards with those folks and get them to stay up later and later and later till they're actually adjusted the opposite direction. That's a little bit. I wouldn't do that on your own. That's something we do clinically, but typically the individual's chronotype will help determine whether or not they'll be as successful going a certain direction or not. And also, if it's a very entrenched chronotype, some people have very strong amplitudes of their chronotype versus a little bit flatter. Actually, if you look at adolescence, that's actually one of the things about adolescence. When you get after you hit puberty, we typically get a delay. So people you start to go to bed later, get up later, some kids really late and they're
Hmm.
like, get up for school. It's really hard to get up for school. Well, it's not just about the delay in the shift in time, it's also an amplitude shift. So if you look at kids in the adolescent age group, they're basically, their daytimes are not as amplitude high as they used to be. They're a little shallower and their night times are shallower. So they're sleepier in the day and they wake up more at night. And that actually, that amplitude is something that also can persist into adulthood, and you get people who have difficulty with daytime wakefulness and sleepiness at night. They don't end up with their high amplitude sort of wake and sleep. Um, so that's another thing that has to be taken into account. Whenever I work with athletes, I have them all do chronotyping. I find out what their chronotype is before we do any kind of adjustments, like we've mentioned, even the rule of thumb, 1 hour per time zone, because I need to understand how difficult is it going to be to shift, and then what else do I have to bring to bear? Like start moving their diet first rather than doing their sleep timing. That might be easier in some cases, and then changing their exercise routines, also what their training schedules look like. But yeah, so that's one thing. Definitely, there are definitely big differences. Now, when you get back from a trip, yeah, all bets are off at that point because first off, you've done something extraordinary. You've done like a marathon or a race of some kind, and you put out a huge amount of energy. So the recovery from that alone is going to mean you're going to need more sleep time. So one of the things I often tell teams in particular, but also to individual athletes, make sure after you've done your event, you recover. Give yourself the time to recover. Don't just get back on the road and go to the next trip or hop in the bus and, do 7 hour travel across the country. You really need to give yourself time to recover. We typically see this with sleep deprivation protocols when we, sleep deprive people for multiple hours or days. And then we do recovery sleep. It takes at least 2 nights of recovery sleep to get people kind of back to where their natural sleep times are. And that's when we're just partially sleep depriving people. When you totally sleep deprive people, it could take days. So I typically, would suggest if this is like a daytime activity where it's like a game or a run or something that's not an ultra marathon, then you're probably okay after a day or two of
Yeah.
getting longer sleep periods. And by longer, I mean like instead of 8 hours, 9 to 9.5 to 10 hours of sleep.
Is there, so there's obviously objective things you can do, but having the right objective information can be tricky from what we talked about earlier. Actively, what can people be looking for post race or post, like they just peaked in their mileage, they're going through a hard training block? Are you moody, irritable? Are you just feeling run down? Is it just a self-assessment on your body? Like what can people be looking for to know, like, okay, I'm not recovering at night very well?
Yeah. So one thing I think also is important is understanding what your sleep is like to begin with. I mean, people start off, with what they've got. Some people have insomnia because that's the way they are. And then they start running and they feel better. So they keep running and it makes their insomnia better. That actually is well documented. So, adding exercise into your routine really helps to activate deep non-REM sleep, which is very important for growth hormone production and all the other things associated with like anti-inflammatory effects in the body. If you are somebody that knows their sleep, like that you have a little insomnia when you get closer to an event or something along those lines, it's really important to pay attention to the signs before you end up with insomnia or before you end up at the event and having issues. So if you're noticing if typically what people notice is just mood. That's the very first thing is mood. If you feel anxious, slightly depressed, or just down on yourself, that's often not just because you feel like, oh, I'm just not successful, or you're questioning your training. It's because sleep deprivation. So one of the first things we see in even laboratory testing with people is they'll start to feel like they'll do a mood scale, and we'll see that it's shifted down into the more of a depressed side or anxious side. That's a telltale. That means that you probably are at a point where it's reasonable to take a day off, and it's reasonable to set your sleep schedule again, to look at what you've been doing and pay attention to your sleep schedule. It's a hierarchy, okay? It's not Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but the idea that the very bottom of this thing is sleep, and right above that is food, and right above that is training. So training goes away before food goes away before sleep. So you think about your sleep as the fundamental. If you're starting to feel moody and problematic here, sacrifice a day of training, continue to eat well, and get
Mm-hmm.
good sleep. But check eating too. Make sure your nutrition is adequate, because that's another reason to feel that. And then the last one is sleep.
Yeah, I'm feeling like
Um,
this is
yeah.
ringing true. I just got emails from runners this week who I'm not in Austin. I'm in Northeast where we haven't seen the sun in forever. So you got a bunch
Oh,
of
yeah.
no
It's
sun
freezing
going
cold.
on. It's
Yeah.
free. Yeah, it was -8 Fahrenheit when I woke up. Feels like
Oh,
-23 in Buffalo this morning. But I'm
wow.
getting emails from people being like, uh, I I feel like I lost all my fitness. I'm super tired on my runs. And my shtick to them is always like, it's February, it's cold, it's dark all the time. I'm not talking about sleep, but this is part of the training cycle here in the Northeast.
Yes, it is.
So, but the fact that we don't see the sun ever probably doesn't help either. So I don't know.
No, I mean, having rode in the Northeast for most of my career, I know exactly how it feels.
Yeah.
We've out on the river and breaking ice on the Connecticut River. Um, I, I, I think it's really important that people recognize the impact of light on just your overall health and well-being. And I mean, everybody from Huberman to everybody, Joe Rogan has talked about this. I mean, this is well-known kind of construct, but it's good to just kind of touch on it that there are experiments in runners on treadmills uh, that demonstrate running with a light therapy box on in front of you improves your performance and your mood in that run versus controlled trials with a light that's not actually light enough to actually create any change. And it's because of the part of the brain that actually is not visually processing light, but using light to process arousal, wakefulness. And there's a system behind your eyes. There's a little nucleus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, and it gets about 30% of the light input to the peripheral retina. Doesn't go to visual cortex, doesn't tell you what's around you. It just activates the SCN, and when the SCN becomes active, it shuts off sleep circuits. and activates the cortisol levels. It activates your hypocretin and histamine levels, which are circulating neurochemicals that activate arousal. So it basically shuts off sleep and it activates wake. And so if you're doing a morning training run, let's say, and there's no light yet, or you're doing it inside because it's negative 20 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a chance to turn lights on and put even a light therapy box, if you happen to have them, a lot of my friends in Minnesota, they all have them. But the idea of having some light therapy with that training is really, really helpful because it will elevate mood, it'll shut off sleep, and it'll create arousal and wakefulness. And a lot of the hormones and the nervous system, so it's neurohumoral activity, will stimulate arousal and wakefulness, which will reduce depression related symptoms. It'll activate dopamine, it'll activate norepinephrine, epinephrine, and it'll shut down some of the GABA activity that is associated with that depressive mentality.
Yeah.
So
it's more than
really
just
helpful.
vitamin D. So it's more than just pumping
Oh
vitamin
God,
D
yeah.
into the system.
I don't know why we even think about the vitamin D, to be honest, but it's much more about your nervous system's level of consciousness.
So
It
talk
goes
to me
back to
about
the
the light box
consciousness.
versus, I'm assuming that's different than just general light, right? Or is it not?
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, light boxes themselves and light therapy, there's glasses, there's a number of different ways to do light therapy. It's been studied, very well. We know a lot about the circadian rhythm system and its impact on your nervous system performance. We know a lot about seasonal affective disorder for that reason, and the therapy is light therapy. It's not medications. Um, the effect of light itself, just general light, sunlight, is that it falls within a blue-green spectrum mainly, and that activates these particular neurons, ganglion cells in the back of the retina, the peripheral retina, not the part that you're looking at me and seeing color with, but the light dark rod system, not the cone system. That activates that SCN region of the hypothalamus, which then leads to all of these changes downstream. That is can be artificially stimulated the same way with a light box or even using your iPhone or your smartphone, which is why we suggest not having them at night
Mm-hmm.
because you're doing just the opposite, right? Anything that's screen related often has also a blue green wavelength, sort of like that 450, 500 nanometer hertz, nanometer wavelength, and that it activates arousal. It's really important that we remove that stuff from the evening and that stuff from the night and then add it to our daytime. One of the things I really hate seeing when I'm driving in the morning is people with sunglasses on, because what you're doing is you're deadening the stimulus that's going to drive your entire day. When you wake up, circadian rhythm activates and it creates the whole day for you. That's why wake up time is much more important than what time you go to bed. When you wake up in the morning, activates the arousal system, and then that predicates when you're going to go to sleep. But if you're activating at different times, you're not giving the right cue for sleep. So sleep will always vary based on that. So light in the morning, no sunglasses in the morning, get as much light as you can before noon. And then even in the middle of the day, when the circadian rhythm does that little turn, that's when we start to feel sleepy, that like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Jam
Go out and
caffeine
get more
in.
light.
Yeah. Okay.
Good reason not to. Go out and get that light because you're going to activate that natural system for arousal, and that'll help keep you awake without caffeine. Caffeine, on the other hand, can be effective in the morning in particular because it's an adenosine antagonist, and adenosine is what we, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. As we use that up and we cleave phosphates, we also make free adenosine, and adenosine accumulation in the central nervous system is what triggers sleep. So the more you use muscles, the more ATP you make or use, the more adenosine free in your brain activates sleep. So that's one of the reasons that you need more sleep as an athlete because you're using more ATP, and you need more depth of sleep as well. So ATP production and adenosine triphosphate cleaving creates a lot of downstream effects.
I'm thinking of the light therapy, and I always have this joke as a physical therapist because I work with runners is my issue is never compliance with their exercise. It's usually over compliance because they're just very like, I'm going to do exactly what you're right. I'll probably do twice as much as you tell me.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Well, it tends to be the norm. But when I'm thinking about like light therapy, is it like dosage there, or is it like no,
Oh,
just like
yeah.
exposure? What's the dosage look like?
The typically when you're doing light therapy, you have a device that actually was within arm length. Because if you think about it, it's like, I don't know if you guys remember physics back in college or high school, the inverse square law. So you double the distance, you make it four times weaker. You bring it closer, it becomes four times stronger. So the idea of having it within about arm's length is about right. You don't want it to look right in your eyes because you want it to be coming from the periphery. So it should be on the side of your vision. And use it for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes in the morning. And that's really all it takes. If you notice that your speech is pressured, you start to get a little bit more active, like a little more manic, cut down because it can lead to mania in some people. So if you have a history of bipolar disease, please be careful with this because it can stimulate mania. And it has been demonstrated many times. I've personally noticed just taking a little too much light therapy myself in the winter can create rapid thinking, which is really interesting. So you can experiment with this on yourself, as long as you don't have any of these other issues,
Hmm.
and try with 15 minutes in the beginning. You don't have to sit there just doing it. You can be on your computer, you could be watching TV, you could be eating breakfast, but getting that therapy, getting it your circadian rhythm started, especially in dark places like Minnesota or Maine or places that
Buffalo.
are high Buffalo. Yeah. So good idea in the winter. Now, do you have to keep using it in the summer? No, you don't.
Okay.
You should just get regular light outside. In fact, you probably need light blocking devices so you can sleep in those environments. I have friends from Iceland. That's where a lot of the sleep research is done. And we have a problem in the summer. There's like 20 hours of light. And then in the winter, there's like 20 hours of dark.
Hmm.
So you have to be able to kind of add the light therapy to keep the schedule like regular for you. And then also block the light when you need to block the light.
So all of that is kind of to bring you up and keep you up. But I think where I feel like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the hype is around is that bedtime routine, and then trying to maybe shut that stuff off. I feel like everything we do all day is to try to wake ourselves up even more and more, and then probably less is done, at least personally, at nighttime to like bring myself back down to shut those systems off. What do you think is best practice so you can go into sleep? I think this is attributed to you. Maybe it's not. You can tell me either way. But
Okay.
like the sleep is the start of the next day. Is that something
That's
that?
me.
Yeah, that's you.
Somebody told you that. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is sleep is the beginning of the next day. It's not the end of your day. So think of it from that perspective. When you're preparing to get up in the morning, it's pretty simple, right? People know they get up, they brush their teeth, they take it, whatever they do, right? They get ready for their run. This is what you do every morning. Then after your run, you have a shake or you have a meal or whatever you do. Then you take a shower and it's very clearly scripted in your mind. You don't have to even think about it. You just do it. That's what it should be like at night. In fact, what I often tell people is, not everybody has kids, right? But everybody's been a kid. So remember when you were a kid, what did your parents do with you? You had a bedtime. You got prepared for bed. You took a bath. You read a book. You did something, a devotion, whatever you did in your family. But it took like a half hour, almost an hour
Wind down.
for a
Yeah.
kid to get ready for bed, right? And it was delay, right? Constantly. I just want to stay up one more minute.
I got a
So
question. Yeah.
exactly. I've got, Dad, what happens if I die? Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So the point of using that experience, there's a reason we do that because we're behaviorally training our children to be able to be self-soothers, to go to sleep on their own. We don't want to have to be in the environment. We don't want to be their pillows. We want them to be able to do this themselves. We forget that. As soon as we become socially active, we just forget about it. We leave our houses and after high school or even in high school, and we're not doing that for ourselves. That's what we have to get back to is just the natural preparation for sleep that we don't do. And that can be simple as turning off all the electronics in your house, dimming the lights in your house. You don't turn them off and put candles on. I mean, if you want to, that's great, but
Set
just
the
dim
mood.
the lights. Yeah, go out and get a bunch of dimmers, put them up in your house because it's really important that we don't get a lot of light in the evening. I especially just kind of look at like the natural pattern, right? So if you're going to go to bed at 9 o'clock, if that's what you really want, you want to go to bed at 9 o'clock every night. That means at 8 o'clock, you got to kind of get the house prepared for bedtime. Not you, the house. You need to prepare the house, lower the blinds, lower the light. You can have music on in the background, whatever's going on, it's cool, but you need to actually start to internalize, not externalize. This is not a time for social media. It's not a time for your phone to be active. It's not a time for you to be online. You should be watching this video. You should be doing something that is internalizing. And typically, what people gravitate to is things like meditation or reading. Some people journal. Others, might have insomnia issues, real problems with their sleep, and they may have racing minds. And a racing mind is something that we can actually use cognitive behavioral therapy principles to help control. And so CBT, or what we call CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, can be very helpful in establishing a routine, making the bedroom in particular and the bed into what we call a sleep sanctuary. Nothing else is there. It's boring. We don't want the bedroom to be exciting. We want it to be boring. No TVs, no radios, lighting down, temperature cool, all the lighting, the environment's comfortable. It's meant for sleep. It's a place you just want to go to sleep. I think that's one of the keys. And then the next is using the bedroom only for sleep. So if you're falling asleep, but you're finding yourself waking up thinking and waking up thinking, get out of your sleep space. Get out of your sleep sanctuary. It's for sleep. Go in another room, sit in a chair with a single light or something, nothing light, not your phone, and do the same behaviors to relax yourself as you did before, whether it's reading something that's not important, just fun, or doing a meditation or a breathing exercise, or HRV biofeedback, which is another thing I like to incorporate in the evening in particular to train you how to activate. And then when you're yawning, actually, you can't stay awake, that's when you get back in bed. You don't get back in bed just thinking you're sleepy. You get back in bed when you're ready to fall asleep. And that's what creates, it's called stimulus control. You're controlling the stimulus, which is the bed in the bedroom. It only means sleep to me. And then the other aspects of this, different relaxation therapies, you can learn how to do segmental relaxation. We activate an area, feel it really tight, and then relax it and feel what relaxation feels like. That's actually been proven by clinical trials for years to work really well for people with that sort of physical mind restlessness. You just go muscle group by muscle group, and you do that across it. All of a sudden, you start to feel heavy. Notice how gravity pulls you into your bed. Those kinds of feelings. That's what you're looking for. So that, and then there's also something called sleep restriction or sleep compression. And sleep restriction or compression is if we know how much sleep you're getting, you use your ring or your wristwatch or whatever you have to tell you, hey, I only get average like 5.5 hours of sleep. Okay, 5.5 hours of sleep. What's your wake up time? 6 a.m. Okay, you're not going to bed until 1:30 in the morning now. What? That's right, because you get 5.5 hours of sleep. So we're going to keep the amount of time in bed equal to your actual average sleep time. And then once your sleep efficiency reaches 85% or more, we're going to extend your sleep. You're going to go to bed a little earlier and then a little earlier. And we keep it until we can get to 7 to 8 hours at that sleep restriction. It's the most effective part of cognitive behavioral therapy. I wouldn't do it by myself. I would do it with a therapist, but it is very helpful to do that. And then finally, there's something called cognitive restructuring, which is challenging your thoughts, challenging the worries, and actually coming up with fact-based approaches to manage those thoughts. Some people do well with that approach. Others find it worse. They get like more uptight about their thought process. And so there I like to use something called ACT therapy or ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. And a lot of athletes actually do well with ACT therapy. And that works from the principle of your values. So things that are important to you, that you value. And there's a way to figure that out. You learn that from an ACT therapist. And those values are then what you focus on in the sense that I can't sleep. So what? What's the worst? So what? What's the big deal? How's that going to, how does that really affect you? And understanding that it's not about trying to change the goal. It's not a goal to sleep. You're not trying to change the outcome. You're just trying to see what is this? What am I dealing with here? And then sit with it, try to be comfortable with it. And at the same time, allow rest to occur. You don't have to sleep, just rest.
Yeah.
Just allow yourself to rest. And you can do things like meditate, you can do other things. And all of a sudden, you'll start to see that you're not actually changing your thoughts. It's not about a goal, it's about the value that you've structured for yourself. But, it's really important for me and my family that I live a long life and healthy life. And that's why I'm doing this. And so it becomes a different approach. And those are the things that can be really helpful for people if they're not sleeping well.
I'm gonna have to play this back for my wife in a snippet. I'll cut myself out, but she's the serial, lays down, thinks about everything that's happening at night, and it all comes flooding back. But if I tell her, if she listens to this, and I even give her the advice, well, this is some things you can do, she'll stress more about the fact that she has to do these things. So I'm gonna have to snip you and just have you explain it, and then she can listen to it, because she's that serial. I feel like, I don't know if you find this is like most of the women I talk to have that sense. Or like my husband, like his head, he's out before he hits the pillow. And then like I'm staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the kids and all the things they have.
Too.
But
yep. And so I think it takes more to understand this approach. And the psychologist who originated the concept of ACT therapy, his name's Stephen Hayes. And he's a book called A Liberated Mind. And I would suggest, if you're interested, get the book and read the book. It's not something that's like a how-to manual. It's not necessarily a therapeutic approach. It's meant for everybody to read. And it gives you an understanding of where it came from and why he came up with this theory, and all of the data that's gone into supporting it, and all the research that he's done with this approach. And then applying it to insomnia becomes sort of obvious, in the sense that how would I approach my problem here with an ACT mindset, a flexibility of thinking versus a locked thought process. And that's very much an issue for athletes, because we get locked in. We sit very strong-minded about what we're doing, and that discipline becomes almost the opposite. It creates the problem more than the solution. So having the ability to be flexible in your thinking is what ACT is all about, and teaching that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, we want to go back a little bit about, I feel like with sleep coming on and doing stuff, two things that I think, actually one thing that I think it's done is, I feel like there's been a bigger conversation around alcohol since I've seen like sleep come into the conversation. And I know, there's been, a lot of talk about it. And then even just like looking at sales and things have changed. I feel like sleep has gone after that a little bit, but I'm curious, if you can kind of help us understand alcohol effect on sleep. But also, you mentioned diet a couple of times. Is there any correlation between, dinner and sleep, and late night snacking and sleeping? And how can we think about those things for our sleep?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of focus on diet. I mean, intermittent fasting to, the carnivore diets, all kinds of stuff out there. And honestly, what we know from the actual literature is that a Mediterranean diet is probably the healthiest thing you can do. That means a little bit of protein from a specific set of proteins, a lot of plant-based protein, as well as plant-based carbohydrates that are more raw food than anything else, or less processed, I'd say, is the real key. That's what all of our research suggests, that's really effective. It helps people with sleep apnea, and helps people with hypertension, helps people who are athletes. If you go closer to the vegan side, it gets better for certain people. It gets worse for others. I mean, it really depends on your own metabolism. So I think the key thing here is not just necessarily, if we just all sort of factor in that people who are healthy are not eating processed food. You're not eating at McDonald's regularly, and that's a big part of the assumption. The next big thing is your timing of when you eat. And we talked a little bit about this in the circadian rhythm discussion, but when you eat really helps to predict the activity of your nervous system. And so if you put a bunch of food in your gut, 2 hours before you're going to go to sleep, you're going to be activating and processing that the entire time. Now, the more complex the food is, the spicier the food also activates that central nervous system more. So things that you have to break down that are like full of fat or full of spice, they become much more difficult to process at night. So think about there's actually a great researcher that did a lot of work in the his name's Kripke, and he did a lot of work with circadian timing of food. And one of his last lectures I saw probably about 5, 10 years ago, he talked about the concept of eating like a king in the morning, eating like a prince in the afternoon, and a pauper at night. And his research basically bore all that out. The idea of starting your day off with energy dense food, and then throughout the day, smaller quantities of energy dense food. But then towards the evening, really getting it down to smaller quantities or even foods that are easily digestible, not processed, but easily digestible. Um, think of it more like in the line of like shakes and things that if you're an athlete, you're putting things that have already been microlyzed into small proteins so you can be uptaken in the gut much more easily. Think of it that way. So like your raw foods and stuff in the morning, and as you get toward the rest of the day, you're eating things that are a little bit easier to process. You really shouldn't have a lot in your gut 2 hours before you go to bed. That's the way I look at it. So if you go to bed a little bit hungry, that's okay. I don't want you to be hungry, but if you're a little bit, maybe have a little bite of the protein, a little bite of the protein bar, or have a chew or something that will just keep your gut from activating and causing you to feel an upset stomach. That's good. You want to be hydrated as well because you're going to be sleeping, and it means you're not drinking and you're breathing. So every time you breathe, you're losing you're expiring
Moisture,
air
yeah.
with moisture. So you want to be well hydrated, but that doesn't happen right at bedtime. Hydration starts in the morning. And you got to hydrate through the day. If you get behind on your hydration, you're not going to make up for it at night. In fact, if you start to try to make up for it at night, you're going to be up peeing all night. So I really recommend that especially athletes use salted waters only because it helps to retain the water. There's a lot of data around like a small amount of glucose and salt in the water helps to move the water across the gut barrier. It's an active uptake, osmotic uptake, as well as active uptake. So I would use something like that to resuscitate your body throughout the day, not just at night. Um, and then your second question was not just about food, but talking about alcohol. Alcohol. So lots of data on alcohol. We know that when you drink alcohol, it not only inhibits REM sleep, it also does a lot of things to the sympathetic nervous system. So even a little bit of alcohol activates the sympathetic nervous system. So you'll suddenly see, like we talked earlier, HRV will start to go down. But also you'll see that if you look at sleep stages across like a polysomnogram, you'll see lighter stages of non-REM sleep with intermittent wakefulness happening. And also you'll see that there's no deep sleep. You'll get a little bit of deep sleep, it'll pop into lighter sleep. So you'll end up with lighter non-REM sleep. And then your REM cycles, which happen every 90 to 120 minutes through the night, are inhibited. So REM is inhibited, that pedunculopontine nucleus we were talking about earlier, it's directly inhibited by alcohol. And then until the alcohol is actually metabolized by your liver, and every ounce is about an ounce per hour of metabolism, um, it takes the liver that long to metabolize it. Until it's all metabolized, you stay out of REM. And then all of a sudden, like instead of going 90 minutes into REM for a cycle, maybe 2 hours before your first REM cycle or 3 hours. And then all of a sudden you go into REM rebound. You have a lot of REM sleep and very, it's not very restful sleep. REM sleep is not like non-REM. Non-REM is where you reset all your neurochemicals. You're basically repackaging, you're setting your insulin levels, you're managing temperature, you're also changing anti-inflammatory hormones. During REM sleep, it's just like wakefulness. You get a lot of excessive activity, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up. So it's not restful. And if you get REM rebound, oftentimes that's where people wake up. They wake up in this scary dream or they even hallucinate. And this is like sort of the idea of like people going through withdrawals, like the DTs, the dementia tremens. That's basically hallucinations associated with REM, jumping into wakefulness. So um, definitely alcohol has some really bad effects, activating sympathetic nervous system, inhibiting REM sleep, causing rebound later at night. Not very helpful for your sleep. And then um, on top of that, if you continue to use alcohol over time, you just increase the chances of damage to a number of other organs, including the blood vessels. That's the main thing, because the systemic vascular inflammation associated with sleep deprivation is already there because you're drinking alcohol. Now you add it on top the actual insult of the alcohol itself. So big time downside. And I think we're seeing a big change, in generational change in
Yeah.
alcohol intake, which is quite cool in my mind. It's sort of like where cigarettes were in the generation before me.
I
Like
think there was
we didn't
so
smoke.
many, well, like there's no, like, I guess you have like Zen and all these things for, for,
I was
that
going to
are,
bring that up actually. It's not a good thing. I'm seeing a lot more Zyn use, and that
yeah,
is a problem. Even in athletes, I'm seeing a lot of Zyn use, which is being used as an artificial stimulant. Um, and the effect of nicotine, it's an acetylcholine activator, so it activates frontal cortex. It creates arousal and wakefulness, but it also is overactivating a system that typically we don't want to overactivate. Acetylcholine is responsible for a lot of neurologic function associated with movement, associated with uh, thought process, emotion processing as well. So I think that we're going to kind of see similar problems with Zyn because people are using so much of it, and I see a lot of
geez.
insomnia associated with it. Yeah,
Yeah. I think one thing that I think has really helped move the alcohol, you know, campaign away from alcohol is there's actually decent options now too. Like it used to be like, oh, duels back in the day, but Athletic Brew, there's a lot of like people that have come out with like, oh, this is
yeah,
actually pretty good. I can do
yeah,
this. And
yeah.
then you're not
Michelob
like,
Ultra.
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
yeah. It was,
yeah,
I remember old
yeah,
duels days for my dad, if they had it at a party or something like, what is this? This is
yeah.
not very good.
Yeah, my
Um,
favorite's Guinness. Non-alcoholic Guinness
I
is
heard it's
amazing.
amazing.
Actually,
I heard,
it
yeah,
is beautiful,
indistinguishable. Yeah.
indistinguishable. I'll take it any day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, I know we talked about, and this is kind of where I want to, oh, I know I'm appreciative of your time, so I'll move this to the point. One thing we talked about is, the biggest challenge is getting good data around the wearables and things. And let's say that
Mhm.
continues to improve. It seems like it's
Yeah,
gonna, you guys are looking at it
it
differently.
is.
I'm sure everyone else will start looking at it differently. If you had to build this in, so like, for example, we will take a lot of your training data and we'll get a sense of, your in training information. So, you know, we have longitudinal data. This is where if your heart rate zones are correct, we know like when you do this kind of aerobic run, this is your average heart rate. It's coming down. We can see better fitness. We can see that your paces are improving to stay in that zone. So we get a sense of improved fitness. How do you think you can take the non-activity level data from sleep and apply that back in? Would you see like changes in effort for given paces paired with certain sleep metrics, assuming you can get really good metrics out of sleep? Like, how would you build that tool into like a training plan?
Yeah, so typically the measures that you see from consumer electronic wearables are going to be polysomnographic measures. So you're looking at deep and light sleep, basically in REM and wake. So it's it's not that helpful.
Okay.
Just first off, it's not that helpful. The one thing though, if you have a more sensitive device like a polysomnogram or a home sleep testing device or a device like this that is actually a home sleep test, you can see deep sleep. You can see deep non-REM sleep. Deep non-REM sleep is recovery sleep. So that's what you're looking at. It's not REM, it's non-REM. It's the deeper non-REM sleep. So that's the thing that we really care about when we talk about recovery on a night to night basis. The other thing that we care about is your continuity or efficiency of sleep. So we mentioned that with insomnia before. That's one of the things that's not that good with insomnia is you're not asleep while you're in bed.
Mhm.
So I would focus on efficiency and depth of your non-REM sleep. Those two factors are really key. And then maintaining timing the same. So I look at there's three qualities of sleep I like to teach my fellows and residents. It's the quality. Start off with duration, timing, and quality. The duration of your sleep needs to be consistent with your needs. So if you are a person in average sleep 7.5 hours and that's good for you, that's your need. If you have an extra hard workout, you need a little more of that sleep, and it's going to be mainly in that deeper non-REM sleep. So duration, timing. When you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you wake up is actually the key, as we mentioned earlier. That's really important. So maintaining a timing component is really important. And the last one is quality. This is the hardest one to measure with a device, with consumer electronics, and that's where I kind of give you a little sense of like sleep efficiency is one thing to look at. Also, the depth of non-REM may be the other. But there are a number of devices that, well, not even the number. There's only like two devices. One of them is our device, but the other one is a home sleep testing device. It's not a ring. It's like a pulse ox, and they use what's called cardiopulmonary coupling. And CPC, or cardiopulmonary coupling, is a measurement of your autonomic nervous system stability. And it uses parasympathetic and sympathetic. So like HRV uses parasympathetic and sympathetic, but it uses it in combination with an analysis of the coupling between your breathing and your heart rate. And that coupling actually is something that can predict stability and depth of sleep. And the more stable, the more deep non-REM, the less stable, the more fragmentation. So it's a better measurement of sleep adequacy. In fact, it's the only measurement that's objective for sleep adequacy that we have. And other than saying like sleep efficiency and depth of non-REM sleep, those are those are things that can change on a dime. That's why it's hard to use those. But the state stability is actually a very good predictor of recovery and function. So, that's another component that we're going to be coming out with that this year, actually, as an entirely different component of the Happy Ring. And that's going to give you stability of sleep. It'll give you the parasympathetic sympathetic ratios. It'll give you fragmentation. It'll give you much better measurements for you to depict your own recovery using sleep.
Do you feel like the non-REM deep sleep, that recovery sleep, does that fluctuate based off of your body's need? Or you're looking for stability there, or no, hard workout more, you're expecting more there?
Typically hard workout, you expect more. At the same time, if you're not getting enough on a regular basis, there often are problems with sleep that we can help to even clinically handle. And by that, I mean like things as wide ranging as sleep disordered breathing, which could be snoring, all the way to sleep disordered like apnea, or restless leg syndrome, or periodic limb movements at night, or just pain. It turns out pain can actually really change stability. So in athletes in particular, I see people who are after an injury or after, serious issues with a joint, they're not sleeping well anymore. And that's something we need to be able to see and measure, because as you add an NSAID or you get, ACL repair, whatever it is, we want to see those metrics at night change. And also we may want to add a medication at a certain point in time, because we got to get you past periods of time so your body can recover. One of the things I like to do for athletes who are going through injuries in particular is use medications to get their sleep better, not sleep aids necessarily, but medications that actually help with pain and sleep, like gabapentin and things like that, that'll actually increase the depth of their sleep. And then the day their pain is better, so they're able to start functioning and get back on their normal sleep schedule again. So it sort of like interrupts the cycle so that they can get the sleep back first, and then we can get rid of the medication because the sleep is getting better and better and better.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like physical therapists, people get joints replaced, they have neck surgery, they're not sleeping, the recovery takes longer. We're always trying to work that out with people, and never my mindset goes to how can we get you to sleep, but not also like what's the drug I'm giving you? Is it actually resulting in recovery sleep, or are we just knocking you out?
Yep.
I think that's one thing I've never thought about.
Yeah, there are meds that actually help recovery sleep, and others that hurt it. And a lot of the meds that were used in the past, like benzodiazepines, don't really help recovery sleep. In fact, they'll help with anxiety-based sleep onset issues, but they're not really helpful other than that. Then there are newer meds that actually mimic sleep functions. And those are like the Z drugs, Ambiens, Zolofts, that's not Zoloft, Zolpidem. And so that class actually is a far more specific type of medication class. And then there are meds like gabapentin, gabapentinoids, alpha-2 delta ligands that work in a very different way in the GABA receptor, that reduce muscle tone, that improve pain response, that actually reduce the cyclical nature of sort of the responsive pain and activating muscles. And then also happen to improve depth of sleep. So
we typically use we use that typically with like low dosage long term, especially with people with like stenosis and things that have a lot of nerve pain and
exactly.
interrupts their sleep. Final question is, obviously this is going in a new direction. There's a lot of momentum behind sleep. I'm curious on where does AI take this, especially with all the metrics you guys are collecting? I think the biggest thing is, can the consumer, whoever's using said device understand the information? And then also, what excites you the most, in the next 5 to 10 years that you can kind of see coming around the corner that maybe the rest of us don't see?
Well, I think the thing that's most exciting is that we're contextualizing this information that we're getting from devices that have high accuracy with the actual issues the person's reporting. So we're starting to get metadata connected to objective measurements, which is going to make much more personalized and precision-based approaches to therapy. To me, that's ultimately where medicine's going, is in precision-based care, is using objective tool-based measurements of your issues to tailor the therapy and then change the therapy as you're moving downstream. It's not done well in our current medical system at all. And so that's why we have to kind of like revolutionize the system from the outside, kind of approach it from the perspective of building technologies that people can use on a day-to-day basis that'll give us insights, but then build those the sort of meta data sets around those those objective data points. The future is, I think, what we're kind of doing right now, which is building FDA cleared medical devices that can be used in the context of a day-to-day person's life. There are a lot of what people would call neurables out there too that you can put in your house that can actually look at you and report back. There's a lot of data security issues around those devices and a lot of discussion around that. I just think that the future is being able to take information and then contextualize it with your history, what your goals are, what you're trying to do, your psychology, your genetics, which we call, endotyping. And we actually can determine and predict what might be a good option for you at this point in time, because everybody's genetics are different, but also it's much more predicated on the environmental components. And that environmental component could be your exercise routine, your food, your diet, your other conditions you're treating, medications you're taking, the amount of daylight you get. There's so many different things that can impact the genetic aspects. So to me, having done genetic research in the past and genotype-phenotype relationship kind of work, we really didn't get very far with like taking the genetics and actually turning it into something reasonable. But the epigenetics is really where we're finding the major opportunities. And sleep is one of those areas I think that is going to be one of the first to make a big change for people, because we have so much data now.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get this information. Now we just got to put all of the other components together. And that's why you need it to be in the medical realm, not in the consumer electronic realm, because it's not about selling rings. It's really about creating management and tools and data to give you the right therapy if you need a therapy, or give you good information so you can make decisions for yourself.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Early Miles. This podcast is ad-free and made possible by the runners who support the RunSmart app. RunSmart is a training platform built by physical therapists who run with an injury prevention first approach. Inside the app, you get personalized running plans, strength and mobility work designed specifically for runners, and guidance that adapts to your life, training, and body change over time. RunSmart's mission is simple: to build lifelong runners. If you're looking to train smarter and support the show, you can download the RunSmart app to get started. And a quick but important note, this podcast is for general educational and informational purposes only. Nothing discussed here should be considered medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional regarding injury, pain, or any medical condition. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on Early Miles.